Okay, before starting the panel discussion, I wanted just to mention some things the speakers say. So to round up this event, and before starting with that, I would like to say, well, Lindsay pointed out the importance of our role as leaders in the classroom and how we move from being maybe a leader to a facilitator, and how we need to have, when we want to tap into our student as a resource, uh, take into consideration our role, that we are the leaders there, and we move different positions as roles, as leaders, sorry. Then Ian went to further, not only on the learner as a resource, but also when we are talking about in business scenarios, how we need to rely to go into the organization as a resource also. Okay, so how important is this combination of the trainer, the learner, and the organization? Okay, and then look, show some examples on one-to-one classes and importance communicating, when we want to communicate between two people. He mentioned relevant things like empathy, patience, persistence. Okay, so now actually it's time for you to speak. So if you have any questions, please either you can type your questions in the text chat, or in the text chat you can say that you would like to speak so we can allow the microphone. Tell us if the question is for one of the speakers or for the whole panel. Okay. There were some comments while Lindsay was speaking, saying that some people say that they have the same problems with one-to-one students. But then Duncan said that, well, we are teaching executives, so we need to also go for language there. Okay, let's see some questions here. Wait a minute. Luke, there's a question from Adam here. Says, if you ever had a student you couldn't get through to.
Okay, well, the answer that sprang to mind when Adam asked that question was of a student who came for one-to-one lessons. She was from Poland, and her English was perfect. And so I think for the only time in my life, I said, I can't give you one-to-one lessons. There is no point, because your English is perfect. And she had learnt it from almost all from audio. I forget exactly how she'd done it, but she'd used the phonetic alphabet, she'd used dictionaries, she'd done a lot of listening, and she evidently had a very, very special gift for learning languages. That's not quite the answer you were expecting, but that's the only one that springs to mind. I'll keep thinking.
I'd like to address something that Duncan Baker put in his question. Duncan had asked, I'm reading it here, Duncan, if you're still here, thanks. Teaching executives, how much will they pay for non-language training? We need to look at our position. I think this is completely true, which is also why it's sad but understandable why. All right, got you now, Mercedes. It's sad but understandable why some people in the English language teaching profession, if you're working in business English for some time, you end up making a sideways move into intercultural training, business communication training, not specifically English anymore, but sort of the cultural training and almost sort of, you know, all the kind of training I think that Duncan might be getting at, which it tends to be, unfortunately, paid a lot higher than what language training is paid for. And I do think that that's a paradigm that has to be shifted, but it can only be shifted through sort of, you know, teachers organizing together with schools, you know, the kind of work also that Ian's doing and stuff, and a general raising of standards so that language training isn't considered the cheaper option for what someone else might be giving you, which is the same sort of, you know, communications training, but it's not called English language.
Thank you. We have another question here. Wait a minute. From Paula, I think, in Brazil. She states, a difficulty I usually have when teaching business class in an EFL environment is the level of the student. It is usually a heterogeneous group in terms of linguistic level. How do you go about it? You have different levels of English.
One way to try and deal with it is to well, it might sound silly to suggest that it can be a positive, but I think it can be, because you can put people into groups, and you can use the people whose English is better as kind of leaders within those groups. That's the first thing that occurs to me, and so that can actually be a way of helping people to perhaps bond in the classroom, ways that they either do or don't in the workplace.
I mean, that is the reality of the workplace. That people have to deal with. They have to speak to people who have higher and lower levels. Okay, I'm not suggesting that we try and put in the same groups, but if you look at the wide of people in the world, people are dealing with people who have a far level of English than they do at a higher level of ability, and people have to cope if they're very fluent speakers. They also have to learn to moderate their language. Their counterparts and others who raise their levels. So that is often a real situation.
That mixed level teaching is common not just in business, it's in all contexts, mixed level, larger classes. That would be a session, I think, just by itself. There are different things the teacher can do. You can have different kinds of tasks according to level based on the same text or the same material that you're bringing in. That tends to be a bit work intensive for the teacher, but it's one possibility. Another possibility is to kind of have more open-ended tasks, and the kind of things that Luke suggests in general as activity ideas, which exist, which are out there, are often what's called open-ended tasks, which means that a lower level student can contribute a little bit and a higher level student can contribute more. So ELT, many tasks in ELT are open-ended, and they should be capitalized on in a mixed ability situation. Tasks which converge all just on one right answer are more difficult in a mixed ability session. That's when you have to start pairing them up, strong and weak people together, or strong, weak, and so on. And finally, the other kind of things that the last thing that I would suggest, in the minute that I'm answering here, would be tasks which result in a group outcome. If you're working with a group, things that the group participate in making together as a whole, and that the group decide on the roles that they take and the things that they will do, and you actively intervene, helping more the weaker students achieve their parts of the goal, and letting the stronger students sort of rise to what they're supposed to be doing. And I'll stop there because there are other questions coming through.